Hey folks, Sheriff Lamb here. Welcome back to another episode of On the Border with Sheriff Lamb, where we talk all things border and what's going on in the world of law enforcement. And we've got a great guest today, so much so that this is such an important topic that we wanted to do this Zoom. Normally we're in studio with such great guests like our next guest, but it's my honor to bring on Sheriff Del Wagner from Adams County, Washington. You might be saying, well, what does Washington have to do with the border? But that's why we're having Sheriff Wagner on today. Sheriff Wagner, welcome to the show. I appreciate you coming on. Now, Sheriff Wagner, for the listeners, he's been in law enforcement since 1997. So correct me if I'm wrong, Sheriff. And I think you started at the Adams County Sheriff's Office, did you not?
I started my full-time career with Adams County, yes, and I was a reserve police officer for the city of Kennewick for 2 years prior to that.
And then you got appointed as sheriff in 2015. Had to run in 2016, but then run again in 2018 to get back on the normal cycle.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Man, I don't know. Sometimes I think getting appointed sounds good. And then other times I'm like, no, because you have to run again and again.
Right.
But we just appreciate what the work you're doing. And I know you're right there in the state of Washington. And I'm going to talk a little bit, normally we're talking, when we talk border, people think Arizona, New Mexico, California, and Texas. But I think over the last probably year or more, New York, Chicago, all these places across the country have become just as much of a topic for the border and for illegal immigration. And I think for any of our listeners out there, that might explain why we have a sheriff from the heartland of Washington State on our podcast today. So welcome on the podcast, Sheriff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, the border issue is spreading all over the place, right? Where I live in Eastern Washington, like you said, the central of Washington, we've always had people coming here. You know, we're a migrant community. And so we've been affected in a lot of different aspects over the past few years, especially. And so it's not just the guys or the states on the line, it's everybody else that's receiving those people into their communities as well.
Yeah, you guys have had a heck of a time up there in Washington, not just with those that are coming into the state, but I'm going to let you unpack this because there's a lot going on in the state of Washington as it relates to law enforcement, but in particular as it relates to law enforcement's approach from a state level with what's going on at the federal level. And I want you to kind of break it down. I don't want to steal your thunder. And that's why we're having you on today, because I think this is an important conversation to have as far as it relates to the role of the sheriff, where the state is at, where the federal government is at. What can you tell me about what's going on right now in the state of Washington?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I mean, like you said, there's a lot to unpack, and I'm not sure I can I'll get to all of it today, right? But some of the issues that we face in Washington State have to do with sanctuary laws and things that are being introduced into our legislation across the state of Washington. Chicago, like you mentioned, Boston, all those places, California, they have all these what they consider sanctuary rules, or what they're now saying welcoming rules, because they didn't want to use the sanctuary anymore because that could get them in trouble. The thing is in Washington State, we have a lot of policies and procedures that have been introduced by the legislature, pretty much strapping the hands of law enforcement in general. I mean, we had just a few years ago, we couldn't even pursue anymore. They take away a lot of things, juveniles, of the way we handle a juvenile situation when it comes to interviewing, things like that. And it continues to get more binding, right? In the last year or so, they've relaxed some of those things, like the pursuits and things like that, because clearly those policies didn't really pan out the way they wanted them to. And of course, we have the issue of the Keep Washington Working Act, which is their sanctuary policies that they introduced in 2019. And unfortunately, we're dealing with the situation in small town Adams County, of all the counties in the state of Washington, probably one of the smaller agencies across the state, but one that deals with it probably more so than most.
Well, and you kind of brought it up. You're a small county, or one of the smaller counties as it relates to, like, let's say the coastal counties.
Sure.
But you kind of found yourselves in the crosshairs of state government in the state of Washington.
Yeah.
Break us down, like, just for those who don't know, the attorney general for the state is now the governor, right?
The one passed, yes. So the one
Yes.
was the Attorney General, is now the governor as of November, and the new Attorney General is Nick Brown for the state of Washington. Mhm.
Now, what's going on with what they're trying to do to you in Adams County? What they got their a burr in their saddle for something, and I know what it is. It
Yeah.
has to do with a gentleman that was arrested, but I'm going to let you kind of tell that story.
Well, so there's a lot to the story. So it starts off with in 2019 when they introduced the Keep Washington Working Act. There was a lot of things that were everybody's trying to figure out, right? Because law enforcement works with all different agencies, ICE, Border Patrol, other sheriff's departments, you name it. When law enforcement comes into your community and they are doing something and they need help with it, we typically help them, right? And in 2019, they really tried to change that. It was basically defund the police was kind of on its way out a little bit because it wasn't as they thought it would might be. And now we have let's defund the border patrol or the ICE agents, right? And so they put out this legislation that really started to strap the hands of all the sheriffs in how we deal with crime and how we help other entities, especially at the federal level, when it comes to ICE and border patrol. So what happened was in 2022, we received a letter saying that they felt that we weren't in compliance with the Keep Washington Working Act based off of what they felt our policies and procedures should be for our county. Time goes by. They wrote another letter about a year later. And of course, this is all going through legal. I mean, I probably read the letter, but let legal handle most of it, right? And so there was conversations between that and whatever, and I'm not exactly sure all those conversations and what occurred, but what led up to this situation, the old Attorney General, uh, in November, I believe of this last year. Yeah, it was November. We received a letter from them saying, "Hey, we want to work this out. Let's try and figure this thing out." And some of the wording in there, it says, however, we continue to believe it would be better for all involved to reach a voluntary resolution and avoid litigation over the sheriff's office practices. To that end, the AG is willing to defer filing of a complaint limited to the sheriff's office if he agrees to voluntarily resolve some of these issues. So it sounds pretty interesting that that happened in November on 26th after a certain person was elected into our White House, right? And then very rapidly it changed from let's work together on a solution to in January, let's see what the date is, January 7th, we get a letter saying the state proposes that a consent decree filed contemporaneously with the complaint that was sent to you on November 26th. So they went from right after the election to January 7th saying sign this consent decree. And anybody that's familiar with the consent decree understands that they're going to control you. And one of the things was that they were only going to do it for a 4-year term.
Hmm.
And we found that quite interesting. So some of the violations that they're saying in there, I can't really discuss, obviously, because it has to do with the litigation that's in process and things like that. And we're obviously gonna fight some of those things because they're inaccurate. Some of the things that are mentioned in there, we've been housing people on immigration status. We've never done that. We don't do that. Have we helped ICE with information? Sure. Right. They call, we ask, or they ask us, depending on what the situation is, we'll give them some information. People are arrested for crimes in my county and not immigration crimes by the sheriff or his deputies, but for crimes. And the Border Patrol and ICE, they watch all of our public information. So we got Facebook, we have an app that they can go to and see who's in jail, their dates of birth, all that stuff. It's all public information. And ICE knows that, especially in the state of Washington, because of our rules in the state of Washington. So they know who's in jail and who they want and why. And they typically don't share that with us. My jail hasn't been open in 3 years, right? We had an incident in June of 22 that closed my jail because 6 out of the 9 employees walked out due to a situation that occurred with an inmate on inmate, and the jailer got really beat up, and it was a big mess. And we had to close the jail. So we're not housing anybody and haven't been since they've written these letters. And what I find really interesting is if we were housing people and doing this on immigration status, why aren't the counties that were contract with the jails involved in this situation? Because they're the ones that run their facilities, and I'm by the rule have to do that.
Just to add to that, look, the jail that I ran as a sheriff was a 287G jail, was one of the only ones in the state of Arizona, and only a handful across this country. I'm a huge proponent of, and I know that FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, huge proponent of the 287G program. For those that don't know, just a quick overview, that allows local jails, like you said, this is why I wanted to bring it up. The key point is we don't arrest people for what their status is of being in the country. If you commit a crime, a state violation, we arrest you and we then process you. In that process, if we determine that you're here illegally, we work in conjunction with ICE, and ICE will determine whether they're going to put a detainer on it. Now, I know you guys had a gentleman that was not a gentleman, a guy here illegally.
Yeah.
An illegal alien that was suspected of having stolen a car, gets arrested, and then they say you guys end up actually turning him over to Border Patrol, and they got all upset about it.
Yeah. So if
is that correct?
Yeah, in this state, if ICE calls your facility, the Olympia state of Washington executives, attorney generals and stuff, they don't want you to answer the phone. They don't want you to even talk to these people. They're taboo, right? Unfortunately, we don't do that. But in this case, I can just give you this case. The individual was arrested on a crime of theft of a vehicle. He has a rap sheet. I mean, it's not like it was his first time ever being in trouble.
Which is ridiculous that he has a rap sheet and he's still in the country anyway. But sorry, I wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, and as big as the rap sheet, short as the rap sheet, it doesn't really matter. The fact is he was arrested for a crime. He was booked into a jail. The rule is, because we are contracting with a different agency, the neighboring agency for their jail, because mine is closed, it's about 70 miles away. We take that person to that jail. And when they're released or done or whatever, and they are going to release the person from that facility, and they're our inmate, Adams County inmate, the rule of that facility is that Adams County has to come and retrieve that person and then drive them back to our county to release them. They don't want them released into their county, which is totally fine. We're not opposed to that. But in the complaint, they like to say, we drove them 70 miles for the purpose of. That's not the facts. The facts are we have to bring him back to Adams County. Now, the Border Patrol, if this guy's on their radar, they're probably going to end up knowing that this guy was released at the 70-mile away facility and then brought back to my facility. And therefore, they're waiting for him when he gets there. Right? That's really the nuts and bolts of it.
Which is, look, I think the majority of Americans agree with you, Sheriff. Here's what I always pose this question to those who would want to keep these criminals in our country is, what would the liability been to you and your agency and to your taxpayers, your community, had this guy been released to the streets after being suspected of stealing a car and potentially victimizing somebody else, victimizing their property, maybe even hurting them, or even worse, killing them?
Yeah.
What would we think about the Rachel Morans and the Jocelyn Nungares and these people that were released time and time again, only to victimize more Americans. I think that the liability, they could have easily have turned on you on that liability as well. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation in Washington.
Well, and that's the problem in when it comes to the Keep Washington Working Act, right? So you have this policy that says, hey, you're going to be by these rules, these things per the state direction. But then in the same state direction, it says don't violate federal law. Well, it's a balance that somebody's got to figure out, right? And unfortunately, us on the boots on the ground, the people that are actually doing the work, we're trying our best. And unfortunately, in my opinion, this is completely my opinion, I think that the Attorney General's office is doing this for political purposes. There's a few things that occurred. Like I said, the timing is very interesting. In November 7th, that they slammed this on the same day, this letter to us, on the same day that that individual you're speaking of, by an NGO or a nonprofit organization for whatever, files a lawsuit in the court against the county as well. So you have the AG, in my opinion, working hand in hand with the NGOs to get them information, use this individual to push an agenda, and then also use it to take down, if you will, Adams County, small county sheriff, a lot of limited resources and things like that. So when that came about, of course, we talk, and I'm talking to my attorney, or my prosecutor attorney, and he's like, "Hey, this is a big deal. State has 800 attorneys. What can we do? What are we going to do?" So I started doing some research, and I found some numbers, and I went out to America's First Legal, reached out to them, and I was grateful that they were able to listen, and they signed on to assist us in this cause. And of course, that ruffled even more feathers. That's when the consent decree came. And if you read his complaint, he's really not even talking about me as much as he is all the electeds in Washington, D.C., how they're white nationalists and all this kind of garbage. I just don't even know where that comes from. I don't get it.
Imagine this is the top the top prosecuting attorney in the state taking that type of language, using that type of language for wanting to hold people accountable for breaking the law. They worked really hard, the Democrats or the left or this pro illegal immigration movement worked really hard against states like Arizona and Texas. Back in 2010, the people of Arizona passed a bill called SB 1070, which would have made it a crime to be in the state of Arizona illegally. And well, I'll tell you, they jumped right on it and said, no, that's not a state thing. That's a federal government thing. And now the federal government is actually doing their job. The state wants to intervene on the other way and say, oh, you can't do that. The problem is these guys don't understand that we have an oath and a duty to protect the Constitution of the United States, to protect America, and to protect our state. And they put local law enforcement in a real bind when they pass laws. And then when you have elected officials on a state level with a political agenda, which is a pro-illegal immigration, anti-American agenda, boy, that really puts you guys in a tough spot as sheriffs in a state like Washington.
Well, and you brought up the oath, right? We swear an oath in Washington State to the Washington State Constitution, as well as the United States Constitution. And obviously, the United States Constitution is probably vastly more important. The circumstances that arises here, and like you were explaining about all these different policies and procedures in Arizona and all that kind of thing, right? The reality is most sheriffs that I know, we try to stay center. We want to hear both sides. We deal with both. We deal with everything and in between and all that stuff, right? Now, I'm conservative. My county is pretty conservative. We have all these different beliefs and things like that we try to live by. Unfortunately, we are polarized right now nationwide, and especially in Washington State. In my opinion, because that's pretty much what I know the most of. Washington State is, if you look at the map, very red all over the place when it comes to conservative values. We have some blue areas that are populated by masses that kind of control the whole state. And there is a lot of non-centrical anymore. It's so left-leaning. Now, with that being said, there is so many people on the right that are way too far right? And as sheriffs, in my opinion, we're trying to hold the line right in the middle so that we treat everybody fairly, we do what's responsible, and as our oath says, to the best of our ability. And that's really what it comes down to for me is, hey, I'm not going to get everything right all the time. I get it. I'm human, whatever. But I'm going to sure try my best to do everything that I can to uphold my oath. And I think that's where this is unfortunate with this situation that we're in Washington. Instead of politicizing this, we could have continued on with trying to resolve certain situations, but this became very almost emergent, in my view, for the Attorney General to come out and do this. We also, another point on this, when he offered this letter, which was or this complaint to the masses of the nation, whatever. It was 2 days before 1399 in Washington State. House Bill 1399 was trying to be passed, and they had 2 days left to either push it through or pull it back, right, or kick it out. And what 1399 basically did for the state of Washington is strip away a lot of things that a sheriff is able to do without addressing the Constitution, without addressing the people that have a process to get rid of a sheriff. If you want to get rid of a sheriff, you recall that sheriff, there's a process.
Mhm.
And what they were trying to do with 1399, 2 days before he came out with this because he had to push it, it was, in my opinion, politically motivated to say, we have a rogue sheriff doing things he's not supposed to do, and this is why we need these controls to remove any sheriff that is not following the rules that we've placed in their view, right? And luckily, 2 days later, it did not pass, but it'll be back again. They're going to represent, or they're going to bring it forward again next year. But it's a scary time for sheriffs in Washington, to be honest with you.
Well, bravo to you, Sheriff, for standing tall and standing up for what's right. You know, unfortunately, the politics in this world and many politicians are tone deaf to what the actual American public thinks. If you look at poll after poll after poll, they are very satisfied with holding these people that came into this country illegally accountable, especially the criminals.
Yeah.
And you still have politicians like in your state or in Chicago or in other places that, like I've explained it, they're like the guy playing the piano on the Titanic. They don't
Yeah.
realize that nobody wants to hear their music anymore. Everybody just wants to get off that ship. But these guys are still playing these songs like as if people want to hear it. And
Yeah.
the reality is the American people said, we want to fix this problem. So I just commend you, Sheriff, for having the guts to stand up and do it. Quick question on that. Are you alone in this, or how many other sheriffs have come to you, stand with you? What has been the stance of the sheriff's union or the other sheriffs in your state with what the attorney general's doing?
Yeah, so that's a hard one to say because nobody wants to go out on a limb, right? I do feel like I have support, but I also heard from several that they're scared too. They're afraid to go out and have this happen to them. And it's not a good feeling. Don't get me wrong. It's not that it's an easy thing to deal with, right? It's not. It's very complex. It's a kind of disheartening because they're not telling the full story of Adams County, right? And to go, if I have time, I'd like to go into that a little bit. Adams County is an agricultural base. I mean, we feed America. Most potatoes, I mean, French fries, we supply French fries for the world, right? Um, we have a lot of immigrant and labor force, and their story is always, we need these people to pick fruit and all this stuff. We do, no doubt about it. But if you go to my Walmart right now in Othello here, where the population is the biggest, I mean, we're only talking 20,000 countywide. There's buses lined up, big white buses, and they come and they're happy and go lucky. I'll walk in my uniform, I'll say hi to these people, I'll talk to them, we'll talk about their families, their kids, so on and so forth. And they're working the fields. The difference that they won't tell the public is they're all H-2A workers. These people are here legally. They have a work visa. They're only here for the harvest and all that other stuff, the pruning and all these things that they do. And then they go home. And then they come back next year. They know where they work. They go to the same orchards every year and they're all vetted. It's a process that the federal government has set up, I don't know how many years ago. But this whole thing of, you know, these are all these immigrants and they are, but they're here legally. They're not afraid of us. They're not running from us. They're working in the field still, even with my deputies driving around, right? And that's the sad part about it is the news media will come in and take those pictures of those people and turn it around like these people all came over here illegally and they're working in the field. No, they're working, but they went through a process to get here. They don't have to worry about anything. And that's, I think, the message that really needs to get out there is H2A is a program that's running. It's running pretty strong. Most of the big orchards and all those things have tons of this stuff. I talked to a lot of the labor contractors just the other day, and all of them are like, Sheriff, we're behind you. We tell our people, if you're here illegally, you better be in line because they're going to take you. Not the sheriff's office, but ICE. But we're behind you. We know what's going on. I mean, I can go on and on for hours. We've had homicides that have been the worst in Adams County history. A mother and a daughter diced into pieces by an illegal immigrant, and they were immigrants at one point. A guy driving from Chicago stabbed his wife 18 times in the heart uh, on the side of the highway. Both of them illegal immigrants. This isn't crime against Americans all the time. It's happening between them as well, and
Oh, absolutely. And
that's
they're
the
not isolated incidents.
correct. So,
Well, Sheriff, you've got a whole group of sheriffs that are listening to this podcast. Plus, you got a lot of freedom-loving Americans who want good people in this country, but we also believe that you can't come in this country illegally. We believe in the right processes. We believe in, getting the right reform to immigration in this country. What Anything else you want to share with that group of people, with the fellow sheriffs? Anything that we can do for you as Americans to help you in this custard stand that you're in right now?
yeah, it's kind of hard for me. All I'd say to the American public is lift where you stand and try really hard to understand where we need to go. It's going to be hard. There's a lot of things that are happening. But realistically, we need to get back to normalcy. We need to start communicating better with each other instead of yelling at each other. We need to stop suing just because we're unhappy with a result. We need to stop not having conversations and really, in my opinion, just support each other. Um, Go back to, and for the sheriffs out there, I mean, I have, like I said, been here since 2014 as the sheriff, right? And my goal was to have my staff mirror my community. I have guys here that got their citizenship that work for me. They're my best deputies. They're my best leaders. They came to get their citizenship. They joined the military. They went through the process. I've got a guy from Venezuela. I've got a few guys from Mexico direct. I've got an African American working for me, and I'm talking middle Washington state. We mirror our community. One of the biggest things that I can say about my sheriff's office is all my deputies live in my county.
That's great.
I require that. We police who we love.
Well, Sheriff, I mean, I don't think you could have said it any better. You are the embodiment of a sheriff. You believe in your community, you love it, you love your people that are working for you. I think most sheriff's offices across this country probably mirror their demographic. Mine did in our county. We mirrored our demographic.
Sure.
I think that the majority of Americans in this country believe this is the best country in the world, and we're okay with people coming here, but we want them to do it the right way.
Yep.
But we have to hold people accountable that don't do it the right way. And
Sure.
I appreciate you taking that stand in a state that has really kind of gone off the rails as it relates to law enforcement in the first place, but
Yep.
also how they treat sheriffs and their view on this illegal immigration in this country. So, no, Sheriff, we're going to be praying for you, and we're going to be doing what we can. I appreciate FAIR even giving us this platform to bring you on.
Yeah.
Please, anybody out there listening, go support FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. You can go to fairus.org and you can support the movement that is standing behind men like this Sheriff Wagner out in Adams County, Washington, who's fighting the good fight. Sheriff, God bless you. We appreciate you coming on and talking to us today and giving us a little up to speed. I don't know that we had any solutions for you today. I think those are going to work themselves out in due time. But just know there's, like in Second Kings 6:16, I think is, and he said, and he answered, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them." I probably got the verse wrong, but
That's okay.
the scripture is right. And there are more of us that are with you than are with them. And so thank you for fighting the good fight out there.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me. You're a good man. I've only met you a few times and everything, and it's been awesome every time. And I just appreciate you. And just so you know, I have your coin. Where is it? Now he's going to, oh, right here.
Nice. Right in the
Right,
middle. I'm getting
you're up
some new
there.
ones done up, so I'll make sure I get you one of those too.
Very good. Hey, thank you very much. And again, thanks to Fair for having me. And we'll keep you updated. It's just one of those things we're going to have to work through, and I've got a good crew to help me with it. So I appreciate all they've done for us, but also my work crew. They're amazing.
Thank you, Sheriff, and everybody out there. Thank you for joining us on another episode of On the Border with Sheriff Lamb, brought to you by FAIR. Make sure you go check out fairus.org. Thank you, everybody. God bless, and God bless you, Sheriff, out there in Washington.
Thank you very much.